Part two now of talking about markets. We're going to talk about markets working, and then we're going to talk about markets not working, what we call market failure. If we look at Adam Smith and that work of Adam Smith and his buddies, he grabs a hold of this word natural and uses it in the context to mean what we would say is equilibrium. In Adam Smith's world, there's a natural price. There's a place where the market gets to on its own if it's left alone. A place where the market gets to on its own if it's left alone. We call that point equilibrium. Adam Smith would call it natural. It's a place, a price that balances the market for both the buyers and the sellers. So again, we use this phrase equilibrium, word equilibrium, to mean a point where a price where and a quantity where both the consumers and the businesses are satisfied. Consumers get to buy the quantity that they want to buy. Businesses get to sell the quantity that they want to sell. Equilibrium, balance in the marketplace. So, Adam Smith, equilibrium is natural. It's where the market goes on its own. And if this is all true, markets are inherently stable. Markets find that equilibrium on their own, without help, balance themselves. They're stable. If we get kicked away, if the price gets pushed up above or down below equilibrium, the natural processes of the market bring it back to equilibrium. It's stable. That's all true only if our assumptions hold. So let's peek at the world where our assumptions don't hold. Let's talk about the market for oil, gasoline. It's a market that violates Adam Smith's assumptions for the world of why markets work right. And it tells us a lot about how the world really works sometimes. The price of oil stays pretty constant, under 50 cents a gallon for a long time, like 60 years long, 50 years long, until we get to the early 70s. There's a war in the Middle East. The oil-producing countries in the Middle East get together after that war. They're mad at the United States for supporting Israel. First, they cut off oil supplies to the United States, and then when they start supplying oil again, they're working together and they raise the price substantially. That price stays about the same, $1-ish a gallon, up until the point where 9/11 happens, the United States goes into Afghanistan and then into Iraq, and it disrupts the world oil market. And so we get 10 years of rapidly rising oil prices from $1 a gallon up to about $3.50 a gallon. And then during the Obama administration, the price comes back down to about $2 a gallon. And then the last 4 or 5 years, it started to go back up again. Okay? So there's a pattern here, yes, of when oil prices take big jumps and when they don't. And here we are with Russia and a war in Ukraine and the possibility that this will all disrupt oil supplies. And what happens? The price of oil jumps again. Now we can look at production, and you can see that U.S. oil production was fairly constant, actually a little down between 1970 and 2008, and then Obama becomes president, and we see massive increases in oil production in the United States. We see the United States move toward not independence, but the point where there's production and there's net. It's complicated, right? We still import a lot of oil. We still import 8 million barrels of oil a day. That's a lot of oil that we're importing, and there's reasons for that. But the point is that since 2008, since Obama became president, we have massive increase, as you can see on the right, that orange line just shooting up. That's the increase in production. Then we get to about 2017, it starts to go, 2018, it starts to go down again, but not in a major way. So we increase oil production in the United States. We can decrease the amount of imports that we have, even though it's not zero for a reason we'll talk about in a minute. Oil isn't one chemical. We produce all kinds of different things out of that oil. And so what we can produce from the oil may not match what the demand for our products are. We may need more gasoline than we can produce out of the oil that we produce, or we might need more byproducts. Remember that most plastics are actually made from oil, and you need diesel, and you need jet fuel, and you need asphalt to pave roads, and so you end up with more oil than maybe some products that you have more of than you need, and you end up exporting them, but then you still need to import oil so that you can meet the demand for other products within the United States. It's not a simple market. The top oil producers in the world, remember, everybody can't make oil. It's not like steel where everybody could build a steel mill. Oil's limited. The U.S. is the number one producer of oil in the world. Russia is second, so if there's going to be conflict between Russia and the West forever, oil's a big deal. And oil and gas production in Russia feeds Europe, and that's a big deal in the relationships between Russia and the European countries. Saudi Arabia is the third largest oil producer in the world. They could easily be number one if they wanted to be, but they choose to restrict supply. All the countries in the Middle East refuse. So you look at you look at U.S., Russia, Canada, those countries basically produce all the oil that they can. They maximize the amount of oil that they can produce, which means Saudi Arabia and the other countries that are partners with it in OPEC can control the price of oil in many ways by increasing or decreasing their own production. Remember, what matters is on the margin, what's changing, what's the value of one more or one less. So Saudi Arabia could increase the price, increase the supply of oil, decrease the price, decrease their supply, increase the price. They're the ones that more than any of these groups control the price of oil because they have the greatest capacity and the greatest willingness to change the amount of oil that they're producing. It's not a free market. The supply doesn't automatically change to meet the demand. The supply can be manipulated to control the price. All right. Complication. The price of extracting oil. On average, it costs about $35 a barrel to extract oil in the United States, about $12 in Russia, about $7 in Saudi Arabia. Why, if the cost of extraction is under $1 a gallon, does gasoline tend to cost so much? Well, again, the answer is that supply is controlled by the biggest oil producing, except for the United States, the biggest oil producing countries. They increase or decrease their supply. And U.S. companies have no reason. So a lot of that Saudi oil is actually controlled by U.S. companies. It's brought to the U.S. by U.S. companies, and there's agreements between the Saudi government and them. So they could charge a lot less than they do, but they treat oil as if it's being priced at the world price, the global price, because they could sell it somewhere else. So if we passed a law in the United States that says, hey, you have to sell oil at the price of extraction, they would just take that oil and sell it somewhere else in the world where they could get more money. So the price is a global price of selling, but the costs of production vary widely. You can see why Saudi Arabia is going to make a lot of money when oil is selling at $100 a barrel and they're able to produce it for $7. So again, we have a market where the sellers don't face much competition. The producers of oil don't face competition in the sense that they're able to control the supply to make sure there's always a shortage, right? They're creating an artificial shortage an artificial shortage of oil, which drives the price up. And so we pay an inflated price that's caused by the lack of competition in the oil production sector. On the other hand, remember that economists, we always, on the other hand is that if the price of oil actually fell below $35, U.S. would stop producing oil. So we had this brief period during the pandemic where oil demand had dropped considerably, and Saudi Arabia and Russia intentionally drove the price of oil down below the cost of producing it in the United States and wiped out a large number of U.S. producers because the price was so low. We assume now that those producers will come back online, or many of them will come back online, with the price at $100 a barrel. So we want energy independence. We yell all the time, the people, we want the United States to be energy independent, but that equates to higher prices. The more energy independent we are, the higher the price we will have to pay for gasoline and other oil products. Okay, everybody understand that? Economists understand this idea of trade-offs, that according to Milton Friedman, is the best way to say it, as Milton Friedman said, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Energy independence in the United States isn't free. It would bring with it a cost, and it brings with it a cost, which is higher energy prices. If we want to lower our energy prices as low as we can, we need to go to convince the Saudis to sell us oil at $7 a barrel. But if we want energy independence, we're going to have to always pay at least $35, $40, $50 a barrel for oil, and that means the price of gasoline is going to be higher. There's a trade-off. We don't get anything for free. Everything always has a cost, right? This is one of our primary lessons. Nothing is free. Everything has a cost. All right, so people operating in a free market do not always make the best choices. Sometimes they draft players that turn out not being able to play. We want to talk about market failure and how market failure works in the real world. The first example, and we've already just barely touched on this, but what happens if there's a lack of competition? Microsoft sells 90% of all the operating system software and 95% of all the word processing software on the planet Earth. That would mean that the prices they can charge would be unusually high because there's lots of buyers and not many choices. As we get more choices, whether it's Google Docs or some other choice word perfect, as we get more choices, Microsoft's power over the market is diminished. But clearly in the world where there's a lack of competition, they can charge us very high prices for something because we have no choice. The other side to that would be, I'm a music company, I'm Spotify, I'm a record company, and I want to put Taylor Swift's music out there because for some reason, some people want to listen to it. Well, Taylor Swift is the best-selling artist on the planet Earth. She's going to be able to set terms to these music companies. They have to have her. Spotify has to have her in their model. iTunes has to have her stuff. Amazon has to have her stuff. Because they have to have it, she can define a lot of the terms of how it's provided. There are some things, and we'll talk about this. This is really our next topic after we talk about markets here. Some things that we call public goods. There are some things that, turns out, are provided best by a government, by a central authority. Imagine that you had to pay to go to court, and you had to pay the judge, and you're suing some really rich guy. Who do you think is going to win the lawsuit? You or the rich guy? So that may happen anyhow, but there's these things called public goods that only function effectively, we think, if the government manages them, and we'll talk about that. Who owns the trees? If you are running around England 1500 years ago and you live in a little village and there's a forest all around you, who owns those trees? If you're a fisher person and you're fishing in a lake by your house or fishing in the ocean off Alaska, who owns the fish? Well, there's some things that we call common property resources, and we'll talk about this more. But if nobody specifically owns something, but kind of everybody does, we're going to use too much of it. We're going to cut down too many trees and make the forest go away. We're going to fish too many fishes and make the fish go away. And the only way we can protect common property resources is through some kind of collective action, some kind of joint action. Externalities. Sometimes when one person or two people make a choice or an exchange, they can pass some of that cost onto someone else, or they can create a benefit for someone else. When that happens, that's called an externality. You drive down the road, you create pollution, somebody else has to deal with the effects of that pollution. You're at a club and somebody lights up, starts smoking around you, you're paying a cost for their smoking. The school district builds an elementary school right down the street from your house. That's going to increase the value of your house. The school district builds a high school down the street from your house. That's going to decrease the value of your house. So we're constantly in this world where other people are doing things that create costs or benefits for us. And that means that the people who are doing that transaction are not pricing it correctly because they don't have to deal with some of the costs or some of the benefits. And it means we all are connected in ways that the simple market model doesn't say that we are. And sometimes we need to get involved in that, we think, in kind of a collective action. We'll talk about that. What happens if we don't have perfect information? And used cars are the perfect example of this. In fact, economists have actually won Nobel Prizes for work that started out studying used car markets. What happens when the seller knows a lot more about the thing that we're buying than the buyer is? That means the buyer is going to be wary. Persons who buy used cars are wary of them. They're scared of them. That means they're going to tend to undervalue them and want to pay less than what they're worth for a good used car, and are probably going to pay more than what they're worth for a really bad used car. So the market's not going to work right if our information is wrong. We also have government rules and regulations, and those are both about market failure. A lot of government rules and regulations exist because of market failure, because of externalities, because of asymmetric information. We have externalities created by pollution, so we have rules and regulations to try to stop pollution. We have consumers not really able to know anything about how their food gets to the grocery store, and so we have government inspections of food to make sure the food that gets to your grocery store is safe and the labels are right. We have issues about net neutrality and problems that can occur economically because of, or that don't occur, that we change the market because of a rule or regulation. So all of these government rules and regulations, many of them are tied up in these issues of asymmetric information and externalities, either stopping them or potentially trying to resolve an issue that was created by one. There's a lot more stuff about this, and we'll get to various things over time, but this should give you an idea about why markets work, how they work, and why sometimes they don't work.